In this tutorial, we're going to look at another JavaScript problem. How can we take an array and determine the index location in that array of each element? Now, at first, this might sound simple, but we are assuming that some elements are in the array more than once. So we want to get the index of each item, each element that exists in the array, and how many times it's in there, each index for the multiple times it's in there. Before we get started, make sure to click that bell button and subscribe, and remember the discount links to all my courses in the description. Also, my website has a list of all the tutorials I've published. There are over 200 now. The description also has a link to Patreon if you'd like to support this channel and get access to the code files for certain tutorials. There's also a link to earn script. Now, the particular problem we're going to use for this JavaScript problem was submitted as a request. I've rephrased it a bit in order to make it more applicable to more situations. So let's look at a sample array, and then I'll explain what we want the end results to look like. So here's the sample array. Now the end result will be an array that contains information about each element and where in the original array, this array here, the element is located. For example, 8 would be 0 and 2, and then the very last number, which I'm not going to count it up and figure it out, but you get the idea. It could be multiple places. The 9 would be 1 and about 8. If the element is only in the array once, there would only be one index number. And if we wanted to, we could modify the end result so that those are eliminated. So we only had a list of those that were in the array more than once, which was what the original request was. But as I said, I modified it a bit to make it applicable in more situations. Now, the end result will be an array, and for each element, I want an object. Now, why do I want an object? Well, because the property of the object will be the array element. For example, in this case, it'll be the number 8, 9, 6, 4, and so on. And then that property will contain an array, and inside the array we'll have the index number for where that element is located. 0, 2, I think 9. That's what we would get there. And I want to do it that way because I thought that provided the most information. I could get the element, that would be the property name, and then the array would have each index number. If the array has a length of 3, that means it's located 3 times in the original array. So, if you would like to give this problem a try, you can pause it now and go ahead and try on your own to solve this, and then you can restart and walk through my solution if you'd like. Also, if you come up with your own solution, post it in the comments. I found that's really helpful for others to learn and to see different approaches people take to solving these JavaScript problems. All right, let's go ahead and get started on my solution. Now, first thing I want to mention about this solution, sometimes people take a problem like this and they begin creating a function and they include the entire solution inside a function. It makes that function quite large. I think a better approach in many cases is to see if the problem can be solved in 2 steps, 3 steps, whatever it is. And then each of those steps is its own function. In this case, I'm going to use 2 steps, and that's going to be 2 different functions. Now, I want to first start out with the main function, the function I call and pass in the nums array to begin figuring out the elements and where they're located in the array. All right, so let me set that one up first. I'm just going to call it repeating entries. That would be the name of the function. And this function is going to accept an array. I'm going to call it main array. And that's the one we're going to pass in to begin this whole process with. Now, one thing I want to do, and this isn't necessary, but one thing I'm going to do is I want to convert this array to a set, because when we convert it to a set, it makes it unique. So anything that's repeated will be eliminated. So the 8 will only be in here once, the 9 will only be in here once, That's one of the advantages of a set. And by the way, if you're unfamiliar with sets, I do have a tutorial on that I'll link to in the description. So that's what I'm going to do first, because I want to cycle through these elements, but I don't want to access one that's in here more than once. I only want to check it once. So I want to check the number of 8s in the array, and then the number of 9s. I don't want to check the number of 8s again. And so that's why I'm creating a set. So I'm going to call that unique set, and here's how we create a set. It's pretty simple. New set, and then we simply pass in the array like that. And that will create a set for us. Now, if I only wanted to process this, if it had duplicate elements in it, I could easily check to see if the set, the length of the set, which in set, that's size. So if unique set dot size is equal to main array dot length, if those things are still equal, then we know there's no duplicates. So I could easily check that with an if statement if I wanted to. But the main reason I created the set is I'm going to use a for of loop to loop through that. And so let me go ahead and set that up. Let lm of unique set. We're just going to loop through those. Now as I loop through this, I want something to store the repeated elements in. And so I mentioned that the end result was going to be an array of objects. And so let me set up that array as well. I'm going to call it repeated elements. May not be the best name for it, but that's what we're going to call it right now. And so that is the array that is going to have the objects in it. The object will have a property that consists of the element, and that property will have an array that will consist of the index numbers for where that element exists in this array, in the array that's passed in, okay, which in this case is going to be our nums array. So when we are completely done, I'm just going to return repeated elements like that. All right. Now this is where I'm going to break out into another function, because what we want to do now, as I iterate through this set, what I want to do now is check the array, this array here, check to get the index numbers for each element. So as I iterate through, I'm going to be looking at each element in turn, and I want to check and grab the index numbers for that. And so I see that as a different function, because I could use that same function for another task. In fact, I've done a JavaScript problem similar to that, where I just count the number of occurrences. I'll link to that JavaScript problem as well in the description, and you can take a look at that. It's not exactly the same, but it is similar. So I'm going to set up a new function, and I'm going to call this elements index, because its purpose is to retrieve all the index positions of an element in an array. And so we want to be able to receive an array, and we want to be able to receive an element that we're checking. Okay, so those are the two things we're going to pass in. Each time through this loop, I'm going to call this function, pass in those two things. All right, now we're going to use the reduce method to solve this problem for this particular function. If you're not familiar with the reduce method, I've done a tutorial on that. I'll link to in the description as well. The end result of that we want to return. So here's the array. It gets passed in. I'm going to use reduce. Now for this function that we're passing into reduce, and the way reduce works is we pass in a function. Reduce is going to iterate through every element in the array, and it's going to apply the function we pass into those elements. And so for this function that I'm passing in, I'm going to use an arrow function here. But for it, here's the accumulator value. There's the element as it iterates through the array. And then I'm also going to get the index position. I think that's obvious. If we're looking for the index position of these elements, I want to be able to grab that. So each time through, when I pass the main array into this function, into here, each time through, it's going to grab that 8, it's going to put that in the val variable, It's going to put the accumulator, which I haven't identified yet. But basically, the accumulator is going to start out as an object because I'm building objects. I'm building an object that contains index values. And then we're going to check to see if this is equal to this. And if it is, we're going to add the index value to that object. That's basically what we're going to do. And it will go through each element in the array doing that. So the end result is what is returned is an object for a particular element that has the index values. So that's what we're striving to get here. So let me go ahead and finish off this function. So there's the arrow. And then I'm going to use curly braces because I've got more than one line here. Or because it could be done on a single line, but I think it's easier to read if I spread it out a little bit. So here's what I'm going to do first is I'm going to do an if statement. If LM is equal to the value, so if those two things are equal, then the accumulator value, LM, so that's the property, the element becomes the property on that object. We're going to set that equal to, whoops, what is already there concatenated to index. Whoops, IDX. So we're basically adding the index value to that array. That's what we're doing. If those two things are equal, we're going to add the index value to that array. Now, in order for this to make sense, we need to look at what that initial accumulator value is. And so that's the second parameter in the reduce method. The first parameter is the function that's going to act on each element. The second parameter is the initial value of the accumulator. And that initial value is going to be an object. And in that object, I'm going to have a property that is the LM, the element, and that property is going to be set to an empty array, like that. Okay, so now you can see how this is working. If we do find that these are equal to, it's going to take that property, it's going to add whatever is already there, and add to that the index value. Okay? Now I get that this function is the most difficult part of this solution. And that's one of the reasons to separate it out as well, because this could be used in other situations. But the last thing we want to do here, inside of this arrow function that I've created is to return obj. Now, this is an arrow function. Without the curly braces, it'll automatically return it. But when we add the curly braces, we need to use the return keyword. So that's going to return the accumulator value. That accumulator value is then used in the next iteration. It may add to it or it may not. It depends on whether the element is equal to the value. But when it gets here, it's going to add to it again. Then when it gets here, it's going to add to it again. Now that's assuming that the first value I pass in is this array and the number 8. And that's basically how I'm going to do that, because down here, as I'm using the for of loop to go through that set, I'm calling elements index with main array and with the element that we're currently on. So the first one will be on as 8. Okay. So that's going to return an object. Well, what do I want to do with that object? Well, I'm going to put it in this array here, repeated elements. So let me, oops. I'm just going to use push here. And that brings up a question. Why use push here? Why use concat up here? Well, the main difference between the two of them is one mutates, the other does not. Push mutates, concat does not. Maybe at some point I'll do a tutorial on concat. I don't think I've done that before. That might be an interesting tutorial. All right, so I think we've got our solution here. Let's go ahead and do a console log statement. Put my kind of anal about my semicolons. I'm going to put that in, and we'll just do a console log on repeating entries. That's the initial one we call, and what are we passing in? We're passing in this nums array up here. So that nums array is going to get passed in. It's going to create a set out of it. It's going to use that set in a for of loop. Sets are iterables, so it can use it in a for of loop. For each element in that set, it's going to pass in the main array and that element to the element's index. That's going to use the reduce method to iterate through this array and grab the index values from the array and put them in an object. It's going to then return that object. Then it will go to the next element in the set. So the end result will be an array of objects and repeated elements. That's what we're going to look at down here with this console log statement. So let me save that. Let's jump out. Let me just see if I've got any errors or did that okay. Oh, we're good. So I have an array of 7 objects. See, inside of that, we have objects. And those objects have a property. Notice what the property is. So numbers in the original array. So if we look inside that, then we can see another array, and that's the index position. So the number 8, or that element, is 3 times in the main array, and here's the index values for them. Let's look at 9. 9 is 2 times in the main array. Here's the index values. 6 is only 1 time in the array, and that's the index value for 6. And so on. So that's the end result. That was the solution I came up with. But I'd also like to see what you guys come up with, what other solutions there may be out there. So if you come up with something, or you simply want to share what you did, go ahead and post that on the comments. That can be helpful for others. All right, please hit that like button and subscribe. And remember the discount links to all my courses in the description section. Click that bell button to be notified about new releases. I really try to release a tutorial each week. And once again, thanks for watching.